Hi Mr. Horton, it is very nice to meet you. Hello Mr. Frary. It is also a pleasure to meet you. Please, sit down and let us begin our conversation about community education and program planning. Being new to the world of community education, I have always struggled with successfully building a program. What do you think are my first steps? Since I chose to work with poor, oppressed people, I had to take into consideration what they'd never been allowed to value their own experience. That they'd been told it was dirt, and that only teachers and experts know what was good for them.
The idea that students unveil functions of power allows students to analyze and deconstruct the issues at hand. Students then become active participants in a world they believe they have trouble understanding. This method works twofold because students are not the only ones to benefit. The world desperately requires their contribution for the betterment of society. In doing so, it allows beneficial change for themselves, and for others.
I see. As an educator, who directs the curriculum? I come from a formal teaching background and only know of teaching to the standards or a test. If you're going to work with people who want to create change, they've got to know the direction in which they are going and have a general idea of the kind of society they'd like.
Ah, yes. It is of the utmost importance to become connected with the community in order to help them understand this point. Without understanding the soul of the culture, we are simply invading it. This permits the teacher and the student to examine instances of power imbalances, which allows for these issues to be realistically approached and analyzed.
Exactly. As an effective educator, you don't have to know the answers, but you do have to help find the resources. You also can't talk a technical language that's only understood among certain people if you're going to be with the masses of people. Obviously, becoming a part of the community is the best way to understand what the community needs the most. It is our job, as educators, to make sure that we are providing its citizens with the most relevant and applicable information available. How do we encourage participation? I have always felt that conflict sharpens discussion. When emotions run high, people take a personal investment in the topic. When they realize that the decisions being made affect them directly, they tend to participate. That makes sense. Can this conflict become violent? Obviously, when you touch on issues of emotion, tempers run short. The type of targeted population we deal with want change and want it immediately. You can't use force to put ideas in people's heads. Education must be non-violent. I know that any decent society has to be built on trust and love and the intelligent use of information and feelings. Education involves being able to practice those things as you struggle to build a decent society that can be non-violent.
I agree that education must be non-violent, but the role of the educator goes beyond piquing the interest of their students or inquiring about available resources. There are times where the educator must go beyond stimulating student interest and show students the way. While forcing students to view one way might seem contrary to some of my teachings, there are times when the educator cannot wait for students to initiate their own forward progress into an idea or an understanding, and the teacher must do it.
So Freer, you believe that there are times when the educator must guide students along the path? And Horton, you believe that the entire learning process should be self-autonomous? If you want to change people's ideas, you shouldn't try to convince them intellectually. What you need to do is get them into situations where they'll have to act on ideas, not argue about them.
Yes, but this is because the role of the educator is as a facilitator of the classroom, as a person who provides their students with the tools necessary to create a hunger of knowledge and the skills necessary to bring about constructive change for society. Sometimes students must be guided in the direction that allows for change to occur.
This brings up another interesting point. Within our society, most people tend to view the teacher as the bearer of all knowledge. The students are seen as blank account awaiting the deposit of knowledge from the teacher. There are many schools across the world who shares in that sentiment. Does this make that approach wrong?
A teacher-centered approach affords those in power the ability to force their values and mores on the ones they oppress. My critical consciousness method places the burden on the student. This allows them to take accountability in their own education as well as their future path.
Yes. In a teacher-centered approach you have to listen to them and learn their opinions, instead of developing your own. This is the disadvantage to having a teacher-centered approach to any educational setting. Most of these beliefs tend to shy away from the traditional 2- and 4-year institutions that we place such emphasis on. As a community educator, I see the importance of vying for skilled trades and informal education. Why do you think the American society puts a self-worth on the attainment of institutional credentials? I do not feel that formal education defines a citizen's worth to society. I feel that their actions and treatment of their fellow human being defines a citizen's worth. When I began planning Highlander, I started off with a mission. In that mission, I focused on creating a place free from credits and examinations, utilizing only such methods as individual requirements called for. It was my hope that by studying and participating in real-life situations, the students would learn to make decisions for themselves and on the act of enlightened judgments.
I couldn't agree further. Individuals, who learn under educational rubrics that are restrictive, are untrained to understand and dissect the overarching themes of their culture. This in turn makes them powerless to change the inequalities and barriers that might exist within the confines of society. My literary initiatives in Brazil went beyond teaching sentence construction and grammar. It went into helping these citizens obtain a critical awareness of the systems that oppress them.
Okay, we're going to change gears for just a second. We have been talking at great length about the importance of bringing the education to the people. Without question, we can all see the importance of arming our citizens with the knowledge necessary to create change. Things have changed dramatically since many of your theories were published. We tend to be a society plugged in and on the go. What are your thoughts on where the education should take place? I believe that the physical location even makes a difference in one's ability to learn. I believe that schools and universities harbor negative emotions with the underclass in our society. Wherever your community-based program is going to take place, it must be a place where its citizens feel welcomed and neutral.
You bring up a very valid point, but I believe that this is circumstantial. In Brazil, I worked with many of the poorest people in South America. We used the school as a distraction from the atrocities that plagued many of these children. It was in the schoolhouses that these children could forget that they hadn't eaten in days and that they were in the lowest confines of a caste system.
Working with many of the poorest people in Appalachia, I realized people's need to act for themselves. Sometimes I would witness the aftermath of missionaries coming in and promising that conversion into their religion would end all their woes. Sometimes these groups would come back and provide food or clothes. I witnessed the community become reliant on these sporadic visits. It is then I realized that if you give a man a fish, then you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime.
We have some commonality not only in our beliefs, but the conditions we worked. Some of the areas in Central and South America mimicked the conditions in which you worked. I also acknowledge the fundamental belief in the importance of freedom of peoples everywhere. I also believe in the radical democratic ideal, that the capacity and right of all people is to achieve freedom through self-emancipation. Freedom or liberation is only achieved through popular participation. This participation is only realized through educational practice.
My last question deals with gauging the success of a program. We can all agree on the importance of reflective practices by both the teacher and student. Paulo, in your Pedagogy of the Oppressed, you mention finding your critical consciousness with reflection, and Miles, you echo the sentiment throughout your autobiography. So then, with reflection being the pinnacle of continued growth, how can we determine if our program was a success or not?
This is a very good question. You see, within formal education there are standards of progress. In informal, non-traditional programs, how can we determine if we're effectively reaching the targeted audience? The last thing that we want to do is waste the time of our students with false hopes and unattainable goals.
A measure of a program's success is based on its usefulness. Take Highlander for example. I wanted to create a place where students could learn alongside teachers and from their own personal experience, a place where the students felt valued and learned self-empowerment utilizing local resources. Once the students left, they had to be able to make use of their new knowledge, whether they passed their teachings on to friends and family or they realized the steps necessary to effect change. The usefulness of a program is only determined by its applicability to real life. Thank you both for taking the time to talk with me today. I truly appreciate all the insight that you have provided during our short conversation.